So Dr. Alan Goldhamer. I have known about Alan for a very long time. He's the natural hygienist who doesn't particularly believe in what I do for a living, and we've definitely had some differences of opinions over the years, but we've always really, I think, respected each other and sent each other clients when necessary. And I will be straight up honest. Some of you have heard me talking about the dermatitis I've been suffering with on my face since February, and at times it's been bad enough it looked like diaper rash across my face, and so I played hooky. I didn't even come to Monday Night Live, and here I am, your healthy host, with this across my face. So I went to see Alan in my desperation, and I'll quote him, "I want you to get better, and I want you to get better in 5 days or less so that I can take credit for it." And I am. I'm getting better. So I want to let you know that I followed his advice, and it's working for me, and I'm feeling great, and I can eat and eat and eat and eat, and I've been losing weight. So I would totally say, if you've got an issue going on, talk with Alan. So who is he? He is the founder and director of TrueNorth Health Center, which for years was out in Pen Grove, and now in the last year or so it's moved to Santa Rosa to a beautiful new facility. It's a state-of-the-art facility that provides medical and chiropractic services, psychotherapy, counseling, massage, and body work, and he's also the director of the center's groundbreaking residential health education program. They take people through health-promoting dietary changes from whole foods all the way to water fasting. I just did 2 5-day water fasts with his supervision, sort of. He's the author of the Health Promoting Cookbook and co-author of The Pleasure Trap, Mastering the Hidden Force That Undermines Health and Happiness. And tonight his topic is Escaping the Pleasure Trap, a Rational Approach to Radical Diets. Welcome, Dr. Alan Goldhamer.
So I'm going to see if I can speak without this microphone. Is there going to be a problem there? Yeah. There is. Okay. So tonight I've got some information to share with you. For some of you it's going to bend your mind a little bit. Before we start on that though, I'm going to show you a picture of what is in fact a statistical anomaly. This young man, whose name is Gar, is now 4 years old. And he was born with 250 million other babies 4 years ago. And again, what must be one of the most bizarre anomalies of all time, it turns out that this young boy, who happens to be my grandson, turned out to be the cutest one of all. What do you think the chances of that happening are?
250 million more.
Absolutely. So, in order to understand what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight, this idea that there's a hidden force that undermines health and happiness, there's a reason why so many people in our society are sick and miserable. We have to start back at taking a look at who we are as human beings. Take a look at the DNA that's in our cells that drives our behaviors, that make us who we are. And if we do that and we go back to our ancient ancestors, we find out that our ancient ancestors, although they share many of the same characteristics that we have today, in other words, our DNA is essentially the same, the brains of humans in our ancient ancestry are indistinguishable from our own. The one thing that's very different is the environment with which we live, because we've changed it, and we've changed it quite dramatically. In the world of our ancient ancestors, the biological imperative of life was survival. It meant getting enough to eat and avoid being eaten. That was the big challenge. And in fact, most of our ancestors did not succeed at that. They died. For most of human history, 50,000 humanoids inhabited the planet, the entire planet. There were times where our species almost went extinct because it was so difficult to get enough to eat to avoid being eaten. But somehow, we as a species survived. And we survived and we thrived in large part because human beings have a unique capacity for adaptation. We've used tools in a sophisticated way for over 1 million years. We've used fire to process food, to provide heat, light, and protection for over 500,000 years. That's longer than we've been humans in our current form. Probably the most powerful tool that the planet's ever seen is language. because language allowed us to do something that the other animals that we share the planet with don't do in a sophisticated way, which is to accumulate and pass on information. Somebody could spend their entire lifetime mastering a set of skills, and in just a few minutes you can gain the power of their knowledge by listening to them speak, or later, with the advent of the printing press, reading their words. Now, eventually we ran into a problem. And the problem was people were talking a lot and passing a lot of information along, and they were even writing things down. But it turns out that back then, just because somebody wrote it down didn't make it true any more than it does today. So we needed a system to differentiate fact from fantasy, to overcome the human being's natural tendency to make what are called errors of attribution, that is, to misattribute cause and effect. And so we discovered a system called science. In science, the scientific method is a mathematically based system that essentially is designed to help us differentiate fact from fantasy. It's not a complete system, it doesn't answer every question, but it's the most powerful tool that we've come up with at making that differentiation. And it's helped us a lot, and we've become very reliant on that methodology. The next big human innovation was the Industrial Revolution, which was really just 200 years ago. The Industrial Revolution allowed for a number of changes, not the least of which was the processing of food. And we're going to talk about the consequences of some of these innovations now. Despite the fact that we had these hugely powerful tools of language, of agriculture, the use of fire, not much changed in terms of human population. There were still only about 50,000 humanoids on the planet, until somebody made the connection between the seed and the plant. And the advent of agriculture, which is just about 12,000 years old, changed everything. Because we went from nomadic creatures that had to gather and hunt, hoping to struggle to get enough to eat, to being able to settle down in one place. And that allowed, amongst other things, for the diversification of labor. Once you had the diversification of labor, not everybody had to be a subsistence farmer. I took these pictures just a few years ago in a country called Bhutan. Bhutan, 93% of people are still subsistence farmers. This is a country that's only had electric power for, I think, a little over a decade. Here you have people hand harvesting Bhutanese rice. And they're hustling, because if they don't get this harvest in before the rains come, everybody's going to be hungry at the end of the season, at the end of the year. You could probably harvest this entire country in a weekend with a modern harvesting machine, yet today they're still cutting it by hand and literally beating it with leather straps to get the rice out of the hull. This is a population curve of human beings over time. This is a million years ago, 500,000 years ago, etc. And this is the population in billions. And you can see through most of human history, not much change until agriculture. We started to see a significant increase. By the time of Christ, there were 250 million humanoids on the planet. Today, there are 6.5 billion and counting. This curve, if applied to insects, would be called an infestation curve. An infestation curve because we've survived and thrived so successfully, and we've reproduced so prolifically, that now we threaten potentially the carrying capacity of the planet on which we live. The way we've survived and thrived as human beings is dependent upon a large bulbous neuronal net at the end of our spinal column that we call the brain. The brain directs the body to engage in certain behaviors. Those behaviors, in a natural setting of our ancient ancestors, favored survival and reproduction. This brain directs the body to engage in these behaviors by the secretion of chemicals. One of the more dominant chemicals is a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine induces a response that you think of as pleasure. So if you engage in behaviors that favor survival and reproduction in the world of our ancient ancestors, your brain will reward you with a pleasurable response induced by a chemical called dopamine. That's the chemical. In a natural setting, what did you have to do as a human being to get enough to eat and live to reproduce? You had to get enough to eat, and you had to have sex. It's not coincidental that the two natural behaviors associated with dopamine secretion in the brain of humans are eating and sex. Eating and sex are the ways that you induce the pleasure response in the brain of human beings, and rats and mice and birds and every other animal we share the planet with. Now, Human beings are innovators. We've already identified that.